Welcome, everybody, to the Bank Marketing Show. I'm Dan Navalis.
Hey, and I'm Chris Bates. Good to be with you, Dan.
Yeah, likewise. And today we've got somebody we've wanted to have on the show for a long time. Super excited for this conversation. Chris, I'll let you throw the intro out.
Absolutely. Rebecca, we're so glad to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us. Those of you that haven't read the intro to the episode here, we have Rebeca Romero Rainey. She is the CEO and president of ICBA. And those of us in the industry certainly know you and the organization. Rebecca, you guys, you and ICBA represent community banks all across the country. And I know you spend a lot of time shaping policy in Washington, and that's a big part of your journey. And part of your journey also goes back to you being a third-generation community banker yourself out of New Mexico, and which is where we originally met a few years back. And I think that gives you such a great, unique perspective on the industry and the realities that banks face today, that being an important part of your background. So great to have you with us today, Rebecca.
Well, thank you, Chris. And yes, it's great to be here as a third-generation community banker. You can literally say that community banking is in the blood. It's something I'm just a bit passionate about to label it generally, but it's always great to have an opportunity to talk about community banking and what we're doing at ICBA. So thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely. We're so glad to have you on the show. And today we will touch on AI, regulation, trust in the industry, and lots of things, and we'll kind of see where the conversation goes. Rebecca, our listeners know sometimes it kind of flows in cool directions that maybe we didn't preempt. So looking forward to the chat today.
Yeah, there's certainly no shortage of topics. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, super. Well, so you've actually, in preempting your current title, you've been leading ICBA since 2018. So I know that means at this level and with the national scope, you've been around for quite a number of years now. And tell us a little bit about what you feel and see about where the industry is today, and maybe even based on, when you stepped into your role a while back.
Yeah, it's fascinating. As I think back over time, I had the opportunity to run our family's owned community bank here in Taos, New Mexico for 20 years, and certainly feel like I've seen a significant change, evolution, growth, so much within the industry. And stepping into this role at ICBA now for, the last almost 7 years, I think one of the biggest things for me is we've always, as community banks, had numerous competitors, whether it's, the credit unions, the large banks. And I always say, bring it on. As community banks, this is what we do, is we compete, we serve our customers, assuming we're all playing by the same rules of the road. And I think for me, that's one of the biggest shifts over the last several years is the number of entities or players in this space that call themselves banks, that are non-banks, that are maybe fintechs pretending to be banks, where the lines and rules of the road are maybe a little bit blurred. And that I think is one of the more challenging pieces as I think about both from a policy perspective, a consumer and customer education perspective, is what does the future of banking really look like, and who is in this space as we think about how we serve the deposit and loan needs of our customers and ensure that at the end of the day, this function of what I call economic development at its finest occurs in a space where there's clarity about what the rules of the road are. So probably lots to unpack there, but for me, that's one of the biggest pieces, is just the evolving landscape.
I think that's a great lead into kind of the first big topic around AI and kind of adoption of it. Because that's, if you were to describe the landscape in the last 12, 18, 24 months, that's it.
For sure.
So I'd love to talk a little about like especially thinking about competition and how AI is changing that landscape, but like what responsible AI adoption really looks like for banks. Like how do banks stay competitive as technology is changing, as we're waiting to hear kind of where policies are going, what things with compliance need to change. What should banks be focused on right now with all these changes in the industry?
Yeah, so much there. I think, first and foremost, to kind of start at the big picture, the way I like to talk about it is for me, technology, AI, so many different tools per se that are available out there for community banks. And I really think that is our ability as community bankers to embrace and find the right tools for our institutions is a key part of the solution. And so much of this, I think really, especially as we're talking about AI and, to your point, I feel like every time I, pick up a newspaper, read, listen to a podcast, whatever news source you're looking at, it's something AI and the next tool. And there's so much there, I think, to learn. I think it's really easy. And, on one hand to say, both what is this and what does this mean to our future? But I also think the opportunity is to answer that question and say, kind of exciting to think about the potential of the tools. And so I think so much of this is about how we're informed and how we're confident, how we leverage these tools in a way that allow us to more effectively and efficiently do what we're really good at, which is taking care of our customers and communities. And so for me, it's about the mindset, and so much of it is just the education. And I think that really is where we need to be focused on. It's knowing, what tools we're using today already have AI embedded in them to some extent, and how, as we think about the new tools, both our teams, our boards are understanding both the potential and the risk that is up to us to manage.
Well, and that leads very well to Dan and I had both listened to a couple of recent interviews where you had said, if I'm saying this correctly, that AI regulation shouldn't be overly prescriptive. Mm-hmm. However, we obviously have to pay attention to it and be attentive to what AI looks like in banking, which is probably different than it will look like in some other verticals, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about that perspective, how you think ICBA is positioning around what does that balance look like, and even in your conversation with Congress and lawmakers around this, and kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, talk about walking a little bit of a tightrope here as we think about how we think about the evolution of policy, because this is all new, the tools, the regulation, what's happening. Some states are taking it in one direction. Some states are taking it in the complete opposite direction. And I think the federal government's really trying to figure out what, as we think about the risks, as we think about impact to consumers, our perspective here has been, how do we not stifle innovation? How do we create a space where we understand the risks, but we have the opportunities to innovate and leverage the tools so that we can compete? That is one of the things, going back to how we started this conversation. There's so many non-bank entities out there already that may be leveraging some of these tools. We don't want to be in a competitive environment where we may be doing the same things, but have different restrictions in terms of what is a regulated bank allowed to do versus a non-regulated entity. So just so many questions there. But I think really, so our path and our engagement has been just that. It is about active engagement. It's about bringing bankers to the table in the conversations, whether within our working groups or committees, working actively with the administration as the president is developing and the administration is rolling out their AI action plan. It's also engaging very directly with members of Congress, because there's unlimited proposals and conversations out there about how and what should the role of government be as we think about managing these risks. How do we think about regulatory sandboxes? I think that's another piece here, is because so much of this is really happening in real time. How do we have some space to experiment and learn and best develop the framework to manage the known risks and understand what we're working with. And I think at the end of the day, it's about ensuring that community banks are empowered to innovate while safely protecting and enhancing their customer service. And so, it's finding the best within what we're doing here, understanding the potential risks, and being able to move that all forward.
And a lot of the banks I work with, probably every bank, is thinking about AI kind of usage policies like within the bank as all of this is taking shape. Like, there should be room to innovate. There should be room to experiment. Fully agree with everything you said about, right. If there's different rules for the non-regulated side of the industry, then that's going to just put community banks at a disadvantage. But while all that plays out, like, how do you think, what do you think bank leaders should be doing now to position themselves for where that's going? Like, how do we, how should they be thinking about, like, using tools today while that's playing out?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because we can't wait for the rules to be completely clear, because candidly, AI is embedded in some of the tools we're already using today. How are our staffs using the tools? How are we ensuring and safeguarding customer information? So I think first and foremost, it's education. It's from the board level throughout every corner of the organization, understanding how AI is already being used and what maybe some of those potential use cases could be. I think a lot of it, again, is education, and then, internal policies, some of the things that maybe we take for granted, clarity around what are approved tools and what are not, understanding, okay, if we're putting stuff into the public domain, that can't have any PII information in it. And, again, it's some of what we think might be the basics, but it's ensuring that everybody is clear in terms of, I've used the word risk several times. And for me, that's just kind of how I think. And it's understanding what the risks are. It doesn't mean we don't do it. It's just understanding where the potential is. And then how do we keep ourselves safe, our customers safe, our intellectual property safe in this, evolving world. And so education and policy for me are the real go-tos here. And then I think that the third piece of it is the experimentation. And that doesn't have to be within the walls of the bank. I mean, one of my great stories I like to tell. I had an opportunity here a few months ago to spend the day with a cohort that we had at ICBA of fintech companies. So, long story short, twice a year, we select a cohort of companies that are just doing cool things in the tech space. This last cohort was all things AI. And for me, it was amazing just to sit with these firms. And this is what we allow our members to do is just to come and listen to what they're doing. How are they using AI? What are the problems that they're solving for? What are maybe some of the challenges or areas where I'm looking for efficiency within an organization? Could these tools help me? So I think part of it is just, it's for me, it's making it real. And you don't have to be buying a tool and making it real within the bank. Part of it, I think, is just the education and understanding what's possible, and then be able to think, okay, how do I leverage this? What additional solutions or pieces of the puzzle am I trying to solve for? And I think that's what gets me really excited, is the flexibility that AI brings to the table to offer unique solutions for our institutions. So again, I can get excited about some of this, but I think it's starting to, get our hands a little bit dirty as we just understand and educate ourselves and begin to make it real in terms of how these concepts can be deployed.
I like that leveraging and opportunity and all of those things that you said at several points here, balanced with risk. And none of it, Rebecca, is assumptive that you can sit on the sideline and wait.
No.
Yes, you said it is figuring it out. Banks are figuring it out as we go. Now, Dan, what you said, banks are figuring it out live. Yeah. No doubt. But sitting on the sideline is not seeking that opportunity and leveraging the opportunity that you mentioned, Rebecca, no doubt.
Well, and
it is. I think this is, sorry, Deb, but this is an area where I think action is needed. And it doesn't, again, action doesn't mean, going out and, all in and, converting everything to some sort of AI embedded tool. It's the action is understanding what's possible, understanding what the risks are, and how can this help us? And going from there.
Yeah, I was going to add, you wouldn't block all email from your bank because somebody could accidentally send PII through it. So, that's the simpler example than everything, with some kind of AI embedded in it. But I think the approach has to be something like that of you got to understand the risks and you got to understand what you should and should not do with it, but you can't avoid it.
And sometimes using it is how we learn the best. Again, it's making it real. And so, those have been some of the fun stories in terms of just understanding, the potential. I think just a lot of, even if it's not bank related, maybe it's personal. I travel a bunch, so how does this help me, figure out the most effective and efficient way to get to where I need to be? I mean, just again, I think it's, part of this is just getting in and playing with it a bit to understand those possibilities.
Yeah. I know we also want to talk about I think with, I guess playing off of the competitive landscape changes, right? I think we're all in the industry, we all believe community banks have an advantage against, the non-bank, financial services, fintechs. And I, as a marketing, person, I always kind of think about it as, whether it's true or not, a lot of consumers have this sort of stigma that community banks are stodgy or outdated, right? And some of that has to do with technology. Some of it has to do with, can have to do with marketing. And I think there's new opportunities coming with AI to help change that some of that stigma. But I'd love to hear from your perspective. What do you think most consumers kind of misunderstand most about community banks, and how should banks be thinking about kind of combating that?
Yeah, I think to your point, maybe the most commonly misunderstood or, maybe stereotype that's out there, stigma about community banking is sort of that old school, traditional, everything's sort of a manual process, if you will. And that's where I think, again, I get really excited about whether we're talking AI or just other, tools that are out there that, help us meet the customers where we are and where they are. And I think that, is where, community banks succeed the most is it's about telling that story. I mean, I love the examples of, really when you get right down into it at a community bank, you can find, that 24/7 technology, online, service, that the largest institutions offer. But what you can't find in those other institutions that you can only find at community banks is, when something goes wrong, there's somebody there to help you. And that I think is the piece that maybe a lot of, consumers or small businesses don't understand until they need it. And then when they need it and realize that that's the case, I mean, they're sold for life and for generations in many cases. And so I think, and that's why I love some of the work that you all do. It's about getting out there and telling the story. And it's, what is this institution and what are we good at? And how do we excel in terms of being able to understand each individual customer and small business and meet their financial needs, and knowing that it isn't a one size fits all. And I think that is where maybe so much of the continued opportunity is, because I think as community bankers, a lot of times we're really humble and not great about telling our story. We just assume that people know what we're doing because we do it for the right reasons and we show up. But we need to be proud of that. We need to get out there and make sure folks know that this is what we do and how we do it and the tools that we have to offer. offer. Is again, we can't just assume that the folks know that. We need to make sure that we are telling the world really, what it is we have to offer and why this is such a better alternative.
Rebecca, to expound on that, and you're so right. And actually, a bank in Illinois that Dan and I have, both of our agencies have worked with some. The CEO of that bank said almost exactly what you just said: is we're so good at, pivoting and all of those kind of things, and when something goes wrong, we're so there for people and accessible and those types of things. And I absolutely agree with you that is one of the greatest things about community banks. But he also said, but we're also there when things go right.
Yes.
In a way that the national banks can't do, don't do, all of those things. And I was like, well, that's actually a great way to even tell more of the story is that, when there's fraud, when there's this, that, we're there for you. But when things go right and, okay, hey, I'm seeking an opportunity for my small business and I want to have a conversation with my banker. Well, good luck doing that with some of the what we consider community banks. And I think that's such a great part of it. And to take that kind of a step further, Rebecca, one of the things that came to mind for me is you and I saw each other recently at the banking symposium at the Ole Miss School of Banking in Mississippi. And there you mentioned one of the opportunities along the lines of what you were just talking about how community banks can pivot and can pivot well and maybe faster if that's the right terminology. And so can you kind of expand on that as to a little bit about what you think about that agility as a differentiator and maybe even what some of the other differentiators are?
Absolutely. And I think this is a piece again that gets me really excited about what we do as an industry is that it isn't about a one size fits all. I mean, of course, there's rules, there's policies, but the beauty of a community bank is understanding the unique needs of those customers and being able to think a little bit outside the box, whether it's, the structure of that deal or the flexibility and cash flow that might be needed up front or, thinking about a piece of collateral a little bit differently because you've got that local knowledge and understand what that means. And so you package that all together. And I think it just allows a lens. Especially, I mean, it's why community banks make over 60% of the small business loans in this country is because, no two small businesses are alike, nor should they be. I mean, that's the beauty of, I think, the United States economy is that level of entrepreneurialism and community banks fund and support that. So that's, kind of the parameter, the lens I like to look at it from. Again, to your point, and I love that statement, when things are going right. I mean, that's really what is leveraged and packaged in such a way that is so unique in this world, not just in, the US banking system. But I think also, when times are challenging, it's also when community banks shine. Let's rewind, whether we're talking financial crisis, whether we're talking PPP loans, local economic recessions. I think that is also the common denominator that is so unique in this industry is that's when community banks double down because they know that's when their communities need them the most. And it's not about, in the short term, we've got to cut off these lines of credit because this industry or the economic uncertainty. No, we know that's when our customers need it the most. And again, we have to operate within, the regulatory and policy frameworks, but we have that level of flexibility, that local knowledge, and ultimately, at the end of the day, that shareholder commitment that this is a return that's generated over time. And that value proposition isn't just about this quarter's earnings. It's about what we do over time to help that customer, that small business survive. And, again, that allows us a level of flexibility that is unique.
Yeah, I think as you were talking there, I was thinking about the big banks and the fintechs can sort of precisely target lots of different consumer groups at a time. And they can make it really easy. They can remove all the frictions of apply for a loan, open an account. Like that stuff is really easy. But the long-term stuff that the community banks are better at is like, it's inherently a little less exciting, or it's a little harder to talk about that long-term story of like, oh, you're going to need us. I think you hit on some really good, points there about how to think about it. And it's just telling the stories of, when you need us, we are there, versus all the stories of, the PPP loans and big banks sort of turning their backs on customers. So I think community banks can do a lot of storytelling there of how they've helped.
And I think along those lines too, I think, another thing that maybe we're not necessarily great about all the time is it's one thing for us to tell that story, but having our customers tell that story, there's nothing I love better than, customer testimonials, or, I happen to be on a plane and, mention the fact that I have the pleasure of representing community banks across the country, and I get a story. Well, let me tell you about this time when my banker was there for me. And it's like, I love those. And they're the anecdotals, they're the one-offs, but it's those stories that I think are just so powerful, because it's from that perspective of somebody that's really benefited from something we're trying to package and tell, but they've lived it firsthand, and, are probably some of the best storytellers in terms of what makes community banks different.
Yeah. And those stories may not apply to any other individual or any other business, because like you said, everybody's unique, but in telling that story, having the customer tell that story, it goes such a long way to build trust.
Exactly.
In the bank. Yeah.
And as marketers, we love those stories. When those get conveyed to us, we're going, okay, now we can help you tell that story.
Exactly.
Through marketing and meaning like them that are relatable. And so that's the brand differentiators, and that's the community banking story that we're able to localize for our clients through marketing. That's so cool. Yeah.
Yes.
So I read some, I think it was congressional testimony about, you were talking about more, the need for more de novo charters. And I think just even in the last few weeks before we're recording this, there's, announcements about PayPal and Mercury seeking charters. I'd love to get your kind of take on how you think that will help the industry, and especially as we're talking about trust and the community banking system overall. Where do you see the future of the industry going if it's possible to get more or easier to get more charters?
Yeah. It's so I guess where I would start with this is, for me, de novos are so important, because it's, when you think about an industry, you want to, we are candidly in an environment of incredible consolidation right now, and very few new charters. And so for me, de novo or new charters are signs of, new growth and birth within an industry, and what that value proposition is of that maybe more traditional community bank charters. So we're in an environment today where, to your point, there's a lot of conversation about different types of charters. So we've got several trust charter applications in at the OCC, which is for something very different than a traditional community bank that takes local capital, deploys it within the community. And so as we look at these trust charters, a lot of them are enabling digital asset firms that, our concern is that they'll take local capital in the form of deposits out of community and not redeploy them in the form of loans in those communities. So what we're looking for are the mechanisms that make it easier to retain that capital within community. We're in an environment today where, depending on who you ask and what market you're in, you're at a minimum of $15 to $30 million to start a new bank. Mm-hmm. If you're in a rural community like my family's community bank is in northern New Mexico, you can't generate a return, nor is that capital available. I mean, it's just the basic economics of it don't make sense. But in so many cases, it's these rural communities that need that capital to stay local. And so how do we make that easier? So what we're looking for are a variety of different things. It's those minimum capital levels. It's some flexibility within the business plan. We've actually put together a working group of active de novo banks who have put together a charter and have, gone through some of the struggles and have helped us advise and engage both at the congressional as well as the regulatory level of how could this be easier? How could this be more effective? Again, within the appropriate safeguards and, risk parameters. But how do we make it more effective and easier to retain local capital? I mean, it's really at the end of the day, it's so simple, but the structure as it's evolved over probably the last 20 years does not really allow where I would like to take it to a point where we're actually like encouraging or, enabling and facilitating in a way that's responsible small bank charters to really make sense. And that's what I get really excited about. And so it's great. I mean, we've got a handful of members of Congress that have really embraced some of these proposals and are helping us, begin to move some of these concepts forward. So I'm excited about what that potential could lead to.
Well, we're so glad that ICBA is having those conversations too that are future facing, that are about growth and opportunity and, those types of things for the industry that itself. And but both for Dan's agency and mine, so many of the smaller community banks that are under $1 billion in assets that we work with are, as you say, Rebecca, very rural focused, and or at least part of their location packages, rural focused, and that is so crucial, and where local service is needed and all of that. So it's good to hear that push in that direction from you guys on behalf of the industry and the needs that exist out there. So good for that. And as we're talking about future facing and where the industry is going, we've talked a bit about AI and technology and all of those things. And I love that you brought up story, because in the history of this podcast, and we're beginning our 4th year, Rebecca, that we talked about brand and service and differentiator over and over and over again as part of the story of this show and what it is that we do on behalf of those in this industry. So as we look to kind of again look more in the future, and as AI is automating workflow systems and back office stuff and approvals and all of those kind of things, what is still crucial and is the backbone of community banking is the human factor, right? And human judgment, and that becoming more important, not less, over the next few years. Is that how you see that outlook, and even the flavor and nature and brand of community banking as key to that?
Definitely. And because again, it is the key differentiator. It's the piece that is essentially the problem solver or the opportunity creator, is that human element. And it is the piece that sets us apart. It's the piece that empowers the business model that is community banking. And all of these surrounds, as I call it, the technology, the processes, the rules, are the pieces that can either empower that human element or make it more difficult. And so that is everything that we do as an association, is how are we empowering that business model that is so driven on that relationship, that knowledge, that understanding, to be able to thrive in this environment that is changing so quickly.
Yeah, I think I like what you say, empower, right? And I think technology in a lot of industries, we're talking, like, the media talks about AI and technology replacing humans. And, I think in community banking, like, there's probably some pieces that can be fully automated, but, I think we have to be careful to not remove that empowerment, not remove the human judgment for the stuff that really matters. Because that's what the big banks are going to do. That's what the fintechs, that's how the fintechs are planning to scale, is, remove the human judgment and approve, deny, at scale. And they'll, that's how they're going to grow. But that's going to create even more community bank advantage, if community banks are using tech that empowers the banks to do more of what they're best at.
Absolutely. Well, and that's, again, it's why I get so excited, because some of these tools allow us to do what we do best. And that is
Do it
to
better.
exactly do it better,
Do more of it.
To do more, to have more of our staff be customer facing and really investing the time in those conversations and building those relationships, and those things that are maybe more manual, that are not an effective or efficient use of our time. So for me, it's not about fewer people or fewer humans. It's about what those humans are doing, and really allowing that time and energy to be spent in those areas where we really thrive. And that's, again, how we create scale, how we can do that more efficiently. But again, it's the surround. It's how we empower and make that possible, so that those human resources are truly invested in those things that continue to set us apart and make the biggest difference for our customers.
Well, how do you think community banks should be thinking about their organizations over the next few years, right? Like, it's not replacing everybody with AI, right? But it's like you're saying, get staff in front of customers more often. Change the way that the bank interacts with the customers. But how do you think that plays out in terms of what the typical community bank organization looks like, and is evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, as we started, I think so much of what as I think about bank management teams, so much of the focus now is within education. So with those things that maybe make us feel a little uncertain, how are we leaning into those situations, environment, and doing more to inform ourselves, to understand, to develop the confidence? I think the other piece of it too is within our staff. I mean, we're at a point in time within our industry. There's a tremendous amount of succession happening, and both current and planned or future succession events. And I think so much of these are both. It's a mixed bag. It's a challenge to find that next generation, but at the same time, it's also the opportunity to think about what is the talent that we need moving forward. And I know I hear from so many bank leadership teams, it's hard to find that talent. Maybe within my smaller community, it's not there. And it's like, I get it. But how do we find it? How do we get creative? Is that a resource that we need physically in that community? Is it a resource that we're just got to invest some time in to train? But ultimately thinking about those attitudes, the people that really lean into those customer relationships, and we can teach them the technical side of banking, right, and empower them with the tools to help them do it. But I think so much of it, we can't be waiting for those succession events to be happening. I think a lot of it, one of my favorite things to do when I'm speaking and I'm talking about succession is, I'll ask the folks in the room, how many of you have a succession plan for your position or your leadership team? And, I get, just about all hands will go up. And then I say, well, how many of those successors know that they're potential successors? And it's kind of like, maybe not, so we're just, it's not about guaranteeing those positions, but it's talking about succession. And I think with that is an opportunity to encourage our folks who maybe, I'm not sure if I understand, or, with things like AI might scare me a little bit. Well, how do you make that part of your criteria for growth moving forward? Where, again, it's not forcing the usage of the tool. It's pushing, and it's encouraging, and it's facilitating the knowledge that then makes the usage of the tools and the adoption of the technology that much easier. So I think so much of this is just about mindset and how we're positioning both current and future teams to both understand what makes us different, and then lean into those areas where we need the additional knowledge or support or training.
Rebecca, that's one of the things that I'm enjoying about watching your leadership of ICBA is leaning into what you just mentioned, which is about mindset. And so our community banks in America today, there are ones that are on cruise control, if you will, and there are ones that have or are developing a growth mindset. a success mindset, and using the advantages and opportunities of the kind of things that you've talked about today to grow, to flourish. And I do think there's so many ways to do that. And I'm curious, from your seat, kind of along those lines, looking forward into the coming year and beyond, what is it that you're optimistic about for community banks? And I'll leave it at that, because Dan and I have our own perspectives too about the things to be optimistic about, and we're really curious to hear some of your primary thoughts as well.
Yeah, I really think there's so much to be optimistic about, and I think we're living in a day and a time where there is a pace of change and a level of uncertainty that can feel a little overwhelming at times. And I think, again, I'm going to lean into those things that give me a lot of confidence. I think the first and foremost is all of those factors I just mentioned create environments where I think our customers are looking for certainty. They're looking for trust. They're looking for a local perspective. And so I think the time is actually perfect for us to really again, tell that story and communicate that a lot of maybe what our customers are looking for is right here within the community bank. We provide that for them. So I think this environment is a time where we can really leverage and tell that story to be that known quantity for our customers, our entities. We're also at a time where technology is candidly becoming a lot easier for us to implement. I mean, it's again, we're constrained to some extent, finding the scale, the ROI that it might take. But a lot of what we're finding in this pace of change and evolution is these tools are getting a lot more cost effective, easier, more nimble for us to implement. So, I think there's a lot there that can be leveraged. I also think that we're at a time, I look at the policy work that we're doing, and whether I'm talking to a member of Congress, whether I'm talking to the Treasury Secretary, whether I'm talking to the chairman of the FDIC, there's a huge value proposition for community banks. And in terms of folks understanding that community banks are important. And so how do we make sure that we carve this space where community banks can continue to do what they're good at? And so I see that as a willingness. And now we've got to kind of volley those solutions, whether it's de novo banks or asset thresholds, whatever we're talking about, so that we can really move some of those pieces forward. But that appreciation, I don't think we can take for granted, nor can we stop telling the stories so that, we lose that momentum. And so, but all of those pieces packaged together, I think for me, really create just tremendous opportunity. Certainly not easy, not without some curves along the way. But that is, that's what makes community banking so great. It's, we are resilient, we're nimble, we're flexible. And so how do we lean into these times and realize that, there really is some opportunity ahead. We've got to take the action. We've got to package it, maybe roll up our sleeves a little bit more and, create that space. But that's why I get so excited about the work that we do at ICBA.
Yeah. Love hearing that. I know we need your continued optimism and that mindset as well. So that's tremendous, Rebecca. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. We can't let you get out of here without our lightning round questions.
Ooh.
It's the funnest part for all of our guests, Rebecca.
Okay. What's up here?
Next. Well, hopefully they're pretty straightforward. But can you start by sharing a kind of personal best or a business or association best, something you're really proud of?
Boy, from an association or business best, I think the where my mind goes immediately, rewind to the SVB failure and, a decision over the course of a weekend that banks were going to pay for the failure of the 16th largest bank in the country. Over the course of that weekend, our leadership, our board stood up and said, no, not all banks are going to pay for this failure because we do not operate that way. And everybody said, to get a carve out from any sort of special assessment is impossible. And I said, well, we don't know till we try. And leaned into it. Fast forward to where we are today, and not a single community bank has paid a dime or a penny. I used to say a penny, but now I guess I should say a nickel or a dime for the failure of SVB. And I think for me, that's just it's again, one where, why not? And, and telling that story. I mean, there was no reason community banks should have paid for that. And we didn't as a result of the actions that ICBA took. So it's certainly one that makes me very proud of who we are and the way we represent and stand up for our one mission, which is community banks.
Love that. Well, Rebecca, just to give us a little more insight into you also, can you think of a favorite book or resource you'd like to share about?
Well, this is where my daughters tell me I'm really boring when I talk about book or resource. Candidly, for me, it's leadership training. One of my favorite resources is LET, Leadership Effectiveness Training, and it's a skill set that candidly, both professionally, but maybe even more importantly, personally, has taught me so much in terms of the power of listening, and not trying to solve the problems that aren't mine. Because I'm a problem solver, but sometimes I just need to listen, and that's been incredibly powerful for me.
I am constantly doing that myself. If somebody asks me a question, I solve the whole problem, and I'll have to take a look at that.
No, time out. Let me just listen.
Validate. It's okay. It's normal to have that reaction. Then we'll, we can get to the solution later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is the most impactful piece of advice you've received across your career?
It probably starts with my grandfather, and then was continued on with my dad. But going back to times when I was in this situation with a problem, or early in my days of running the bank, I would lament to one of them about all that was going on, and they would look at me and basically say, "Okay, Heatha, what are you going to do about it?" And it became very quickly one of those things that was both empowering, but also, kind of looking in the mirror to say, it's one thing to complain, it's another to take action. And, to realize that, it may not work, but gotta at least try. And they've really instilled that in me, and forever grateful.
Love that. Well, and it may relate to it, but kind of on the flip side of that, what is something that you like to advise or pass along to your team, to your folks that you work with?
Well, it certainly is part of that. How do we be part of the solution? But you two will appreciate. The other thing for me is, it's tell your story. It's I think oftentimes, we might not tell our story, or maybe it's we think the story should be different than it is. And I think if we can just, let's be us, and let's just tell that story, and being us really is pretty darn good. And so how do we lean into that and be real and genuine, and just tell our story?
You're right. I'm speaking on behalf of Dan. We do both just love what you said. Love what you just said. Yeah, that is, yes. Yep. Yeah, brand and story and all of that is part of the beauty of this industry, for sure, Rebecca.
Well, so our last question is the softball one, and it's usually just how do people get in touch with you? I think everybody listening probably knows where to find you online and where to read things that you're doing in the industry. But where do you kind of want people to follow you at? Where's the best place to see what you're up to and get the continue to kind of get your pulse on the industry?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So I always tell folks I'm always a phone call, a text, an email, a LinkedIn message away. So I really enjoy that active engagement with our members, with folks that are out there supporting the industry. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Pretty easy to find at ICBA anytime. But obviously, whether LinkedIn through the both my personal address or also through ICBA. Our website is another great tool, icba.org, pretty easy to remember in terms of finding out about us. And also encourage folks, we've got an active community at ICBA, a great resource for folks to connect with each other. And I do a lot of traveling, so love meeting folks, whether it's state associations or banking symposiums or along the way, and really appreciate the conversations before or after I speak in terms of just getting to know really what's on the minds of our members, and look forward to connecting.
Love that. Well, glad to pass that along to our listeners as well, Rebeca. And we can't thank you enough for joining us today and sharing your perspectives, your insights, your mindset, as we talked about. That's so great, and giving us a little more insight also into some of your thinking through the lightning round. So, thanks so much for being with us today. We're looking forward to seeing where ICBA continues to be a network, a resource, and a tremendous part of this industry. So, thank you for that.
Well, thank you both. Thank you for helping, all the work you do to help and encourage bankers out there to tell our story.
Great. Thanks a lot, Rebeca.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks for joining us. To go deeper or get access to some of the valuable nuggets from today's show, go to bankmarketingshow.com. There you'll find episodes, links to resources, and much more. Be sure to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. And join us next time.